We're getting back into the end of the book of Mark and chapter 15 today. And I want to focus a little bit here. This is so familiar to many of us. I know there may be some that would listen that you maybe don't know the story very well of how Jesus gave his life for us and sacrificially went through all that it took to pay for our salvation. And if that's the case, I'd encourage you to read through this chapter and the next one, Mark 15 and 16. But for today, anyway, I want to just pick out a little something that I saw in this story. Of course, you can begin looking down through. Jesus has already been taken to trial in chapter 14. And then here, today in chapter 15, you begin to see how the chief priests, the scribes, whoever all were responsible for this, they made their accusations against him before Pilate, and Jesus just answered nothing. There was no real need to defend himself. He was there really to give his life for us. And he did say in verse 2, when Pilate asked him, "Art thou the king of the Jews?" And he answering said unto him, "Thou sayest it." So in other words, the idea there is, yes, I am. So then the chief priests are accusing him. He doesn't answer anything. Actually, it's over in Peter's epistle, I believe, where you can read, I want to say it's in maybe chapter 2, that it says that he wouldn't even open his mouth in trying to defend himself, just as a lamb before the slaughter. Basically, he wouldn't answer against it. So Pilate continues on there, and he's marveling in his questioning that Jesus wouldn't answer. And then it brings up this little issue here. Well, it's not such a little issue, a big issue then, but it was the question sort of between Jesus and Barabbas. Barabbas was a robber, apparently had committed murder. It mentions in verse 7, committed murder in the insurrection. And so Pilate's going to give the people one of them, one to be crucified and one to be released. And so he asks them, thinking, surely the people will choose Jesus, who's never done anything wrong. But anyway, he brings up this issue of Barabbas, and in verse number 9, but Pilate answered them, saying, "Will ye that I release unto you the King of the Jews?" So he kind of thinks, well, surely you would take the King of the Jews over, or, this Jesus, this Messiah. You surely would take him over this guy who's committed murder. And then notice what verse 10 says. That's where I want to spend just a little bit of time today. It says, "For he knew that the chief priests had delivered him for envy." All right, so what is happening here is Pilate sees through what's going on. He recognizes the chief priests have brought Jesus, not just because he's some great criminal, but because they're envious. Now, what could they have been envious of? What's the big problem? Jesus is going around. He's healing a bunch of people. Not really much has gone wrong. I mean, I guess you could say, well, he was pretty hard on the Pharisees. He's pretty hard on these chief priests and scribes. So maybe they were upset with him there. I believe part of the issue, and of course, again, that word used there is envy. And I believe part of the issue is that the Pharisees had to confront this issue that Jesus was more popular, more powerful, more of an impact on the people than they were. The Pharisees were very much concerned about their control. They kept the people under their thumb. They wanted to be sure they did things just as they said. They had the power. And they were the ones to decide if you went to heaven, basically, is about what it came down to. If you didn't do what they said, too bad for you. You were going to be out. And now Jesus comes along and he challenges them. He, of course, had such a huge following that they probably felt envious that these people don't care about us. Fact is, there's one place here, it may be included in Mark. It seems like we had at least encountered that earlier, maybe one of the other Gospels, but it indicates here they noticed that he had power, that the chief priests or the scribes did not. The people marveled that Jesus taught them as one with authority and not as the scribes. So these people can tell there's a difference here. Yeah, the scribes and Pharisees, the chief priests, may have kept us in sort of in check or under their thumb for a long time here, but they can't preach like Jesus does. They there's obviously something different. And it's because Jesus was real. Jesus was standing by the truth. Jesus lived it and didn't just teach it. These Pharisees and scribes and chief priests, they're the ones who would tell other people what to do, even though they themselves may not. And of course, Jesus even referred to how they would say, well, you need to tithe all these different little things, but then they would avoid the weightier matters of the law. And the people could see through that. And so obviously they're going to follow after Jesus instead of the Pharisees. And they're probably starting to feel like their authority is being undermined and they're losing their hold on the people. That is probably a big reason why they wanted to get rid of him. I would just want to apply that to us even here today. Sometimes we may question a little bit of what would Jesus say or do if he were to join us now? Would he sometimes see us as playing church? Many years ago, our family, my cousins and different ones, we would get together for holidays, special times together, and many times there was a church associated with it, as there have been different preachers in our family, and so we may be near a church, and we could go over and we'd have the singing, and we'd do the praying, and we'd have a sermon, and we'd have seekers at the altar, and all of those things. We did all that, but we were playing church. We were pretending. We were kind of going. It was a lot of fun for us, but it was, as kids, it was our I don't really want to say mimicry, but it's sort of mimicking what we had seen in the services that we were accustomed to. And I'm afraid that sometimes if we had Jesus show up in our church and amongst our religious circles, it may look a little bit to him and us that we're just playing church. Would we be envious of him? Would we feel like, I don't really want Jesus here. I'm comfortable with my power structure. I'm comfortable with what kind of fits me and how we kind of fit in to the religious circles. Maybe our question should be, how do I fit into God's perspective? How do I fit into what God requires of me? And this is awful to think of, maybe, but I think we maybe need to confront it. Would I be filled with envy if Jesus came and did things that I can't do, or saw people won to the kingdom of God that I wasn't able to see won? If my prayers seem ineffectual, if somehow I'm not really able to measure up, I guess we would just say it that way, would I be filled with envy? I'd like to encourage us today to start evaluating our own lives. And what would Jesus say about me and about you? And would I be like the chief priests, moved with envy? Because while I say I'm a Christian, while I say I follow God, I don't do what he maybe wants me to do, or I'm not able to win the lost like he would want me to do. I don't care about those who are needy like he would want me to do. You see, sometimes it's easy for us to say a lot of things, but we need to confront, even in our own lives, is that what I'm like? Would I be moved with envy? And so that's my question for us today. It's maybe a little bit, a little more thought-provoking, maybe even than some. And it's only from a very short little verse here. But Pilate knew these chief priests are moved with envy. That's why they've done this. What might we do to hinder the kingdom of God because of envy in our own hearts? Well, let's keep meditating on that. Think about it. Until the next time we meet again. There's a familiar story ahead of us, and you know it well, perhaps, but we'll find a little something, at least here, that would be important for us. Obviously, this is the basics of our Christian faith. And so I don't want to just minimize it. It's not that, but sometimes we've known the story many, many times. And so we'll see. We'll see what else we get into here. But we are working our way right here. They soon begin crying, "Crucify him." And Jesus is soon led out to be a sacrifice for you and for me. And so we'll plan to get into it later on. But Lord bless you until we meet again.